It was a premium sandwich.
Oh, and
grilled
his chocolate
bread.
sundaes.
Oh, our ham,
Oh.
cherry smash with a ham, you know. But the grilled olive and nut was just a sandwich all itself. There was a little bit of a religious factor. I think that the Catholic population hung out at gyms.
The rich people.
Well, no, it was.
They were rich.
I don't know.
They
Some
were
of
rich
the
and
Catholic
rich.
kids all hung out. We didn't have segregation. We just beat the hell out of each other on football. You know that thing? You know, it was just that type of thing. And no, it wasn't serious that the Protestants, Catholics, gonna play a little football game. We'll get on the gym. Don't you come in Jim Sandwich Shop? You know that. See? And it was just downtown was a vibrant place. I mean, guys, can you imagine the Vogue shop would have to have a policeman online to let the customers in to buy a suit of clothes because of the amount of, you know, just explosive business. Boston store, the Hub, Red Goose shoes. How many people grew up on Red Goose shoes?
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Talking
Matty Guthrie's lunch counter.
about the Catholic kids, they had two high schools. Remember St. Bernard and St. Joseph's?
Yeah.
And they used to play football down there. When you're going up the hill, you can look down on the old
Yeah.
St. Bernard's football field, see? And then us Protestant kids would sneak down there when they was having a game, and we'd get to hollering the Irish and the Dutch, it don't amount to much, and then the fight really started.
I just think downtown is, I always cherish that memory of, how many people remember Betty and Benny Fox that came down and performed on the Arcade Hotel, astronomically, 65 feet on a platform
That
this
big
big.
ball, that swing ball, they were swing ball.
All right, remember that? Huh? Thousands gathered to watch Betty and Benny Fox, one of the greatest astronomical aerobatics of their time. Drunk every night before, you know that, before they got up on top of the acrobats, you know, to get up and perform this great act, and thousands of people watched it, you know, as well as the News and Sun. How about the World Series?
Yeah.
People would gather around the streets
On the old depot,
to see the daily inning by inning.
down where the old depot was, my dad used to take me down there, and they had a ball field up there, and you could see the ball.
See the inning
out there.
scored, inning by inning, on the World Series. People stood in the streets to see who had scored so many runs and everything.
You
Inning by
couldn't,
inning.
you couldn't get down Washington Street from
Yeah.
Limestone on.
Thousands of people would just jam in the
Yes.
streets. You know that? Yeah.
You talk about it.
How was that put up there?
It was just posted, and they had telegraphic services in the newspaper, and they would telegraph into them inning by inning plays, and then they would put up hits, runs, balls, you know,
Put a guy on base and everything,
Yeah.
you know, they had
And
markers.
people would stand in the street and look up at that scoreboard.
Yeah.
On the side. That was their World
Yeah.
Series.
Gee.
You know, where you sit at home and watch today's TV
We
series.
listen on the radio.
And you, I'm sorry, you're right. Yeah, but no, that you would just sit and watch score by score up on the side of the street.
Tell us about
Talk
Lord
about-
Finnegan.
Talk
Huh?
about
Tell us about Lord Finnegan. Lord Finnegan.
Lord Lansdowne.
Sir Patrick is worshipful.
Yeah.
Howard, how did you realize that?
When you started talking about that center block there, I thought, well, there's another restaurant.
Well, we had a downtown Springfield. There was a Lord Lansdowne restaurant, and
Where was it located?
Across from the Springfield Bank Society or the State Theater. But there was a man here in Springfield became a great wrestler, and it was Sir Lord Lansdowne. And he went on to be one of the first showmen in the world of wrestling. He was phenomenal.
Him and Gorgeous George.
Oh, he outclassed
Yeah, you know,
everyone.
but I mean, yeah. But
And one of the great classic stories I know is that Lord Lansdowne goes on to world fame from England, one of the greatest wrestlers in the world. And there was a lady from Springfield went out to Los Angeles, California as a guest, and these people said, we're going to take you down to the Coliseum tonight to see one of the great English wrestlers of all time, Mr. Patrick Lord Lansdowne. So, oh my God, thousands of people, see? And so she has a ringside seat, they're all sitting there, see? And she's sitting there, and ladies and gentlemen, His Worshipful Sir Lord Lansdowne of England, Wilbur Finran. She looked up, and that was his name, Shanty Irish old boy from down around St. Bernard's Church, right? Huh? And she said, my God, it's Wilbur. He had started here in Springfield, tossing around at the YWCA or YMCA, being an athlete, you know, and she said, good God. So she wrote out a note, Dear Wilbert, I would love to see you in your dressing room. Go to hell. He wouldn't have a thing to do with her. He totally ignored her because it was tarnished his interest. And then he came back to Springfield. He opened up a bar, and tragically it diminished, and Pat died in Columbus, a very sad death, and all that stuff. But he was a great aerobatic wrestler of his time.
You know where he got the Lord
Isn't there
Lansdowne?
a street
Where'd he get
named
the Lord
Lansdowne?
Lansdowne?
Well, out at the end of where
Oh, there's a street.
left, there's
That's
Lansdowne.
right. Yeah.
Now, when I was a kid, I'm just a couple
Well,
years
now-
older than you are. The streetcar line used to run out Old Clifton Avenue, and it made the
That's
loop
right.
out
Lansdowne
there.
Avenue. That's right.
Lansdowne Avenue, and that
Did you know that, Howard?
No, I didn't.
I didn't either.
And that was Lansdowne Park in the woods that later on Peters made his
Peters,
fireworks.
all right, that's
and all
right, yeah.
That was Lansdowne Park, and there's a dance hall there and some other stuff. Now, when I was knee-high to a duck, see, and he picked that up, and Lansdowne Park was a big deal in Springfield. They run special cars out there on certain nights and have dances.
It wasn't really that he would be accreditation. It was just, he was at the time. You know, you're not going to build a monument to Pat, you know. But he was just that type of great guy that came along through Springfield. And we've had a lot of great people come through this town. Davey Moore, world's champion boxer.
Jonathan Lewis.
Johnny.
Where was his bar? Where was?
What would be right across from the State Theater downtown? If you would come right across, straight across from the State Theater would be Lord Lansdowne's bar in the center block. You know what I mean?
And that's the one they had a policeman there every Friday and Saturday night at the door. Because
Either that or in back.
That's right. I was
Yeah,
there
that's-
inside, I saw it at the door.
That's right. You're right.
It was long and narrow. It was very long and narrow. Ed West, that
Yeah.
played for South.
Played for South, yeah.
He tended bar.
You hate to sit and hash over and over, but the downtown was a vibrant area to live
Oh,
in.
yeah.
It was a lot of fun. You took a bus or a streetcar to get downtown.
I was-
I think one of the great classics. Now here I go again. There was a bar called Singer's Bar.
That was a saloon.
Okay, at
Yeah, it
one
was.
time we had what they called the 10-cent economy cab in this town. You could call economy cab and they'd take you any place for 10 cents. Does anybody remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a very lonely night, and Leo Singer's running the bar, and it ran the whole depth of the block. Do you remember that? From Market Street south to Washington. So Leo is up at the front of the bar, and this guy comes through the front door, and he walked past Leo, past the bar, clear back to the back door, and sat down at the table. So Leo, rather contemptuous person anyway, but he's walked clear back to the back and said, "May I help you?" And he said, "I'd like a dime glass of draft beer." So Leo turned around and went up front and stopped at the phone and called the economy cab company and he ordered a cab, see? And so they sent the cab right out front on the South Market Street side. Leo poured the beer and he went out from the door and got in the cab and drove clear around Washington Street, round Market, and come in the back door and charged the guy 20 cents for a glass of beer. I love that.
I want to ask you two gentlemen, did you guys get into Springfield a lot, and what was the transportation, and pretty much was New Carlisle and Medway self-contained in terms of their recreation?
Well, the traction line, which started out as GS&U, Dayton, Springfield, and Columbus, it was also called Gas Slow Circuit.
Hey, Howdy.
That started in about 1893. That was the main artery for transportation into Springfield, Dayton, or Columbus, Savannah. And you could ride from Medway to Springfield on the hour, 35 cents. And Medway to Dayton on the hour for 50 cents. And of course, at one time, the traction line owned Tecumseh Park, which was an outstanding recreational place in the county. The traction line owned the park. And up until about 1910, they had a traction line that ran from Medway down into the park, and then the old viaduct got kind of bad, and they disposed of that, and you had to walk down. But they even had a fleet of summer cars with wicker seats open on the side, and all the factories here in Springfield, when they would have picnics, they would usually always have at Tecumseh Park. And Medway was a thriving little town in its day. It was a lot more life there than there was in New Carlisle or some Neenan or some of the other towns around. And there was a lot of events took place in the park. They had a big bandstand, and the collegiate basketball team and baseball team were outstanding. And they had trap shoot, and they played polo there, and there were wrestling matches and prize fighting matches and all sorts of entertainment at that time. And Medway would be swarming with several thousand people. And it was just a big time, especially on the 4th of July, where that town was just swarming. There'd be a big picnic down there. And I was kind of fortunate. When I was 13 years old, the park I went down, I took tickets on a merry-go-round, and then I got to running the merry-go-round. And that was quite an event for a 13-year-old. But it was an outstanding place. But it finally died out. Now it's nothing but a thicket. Can't even hardly find any evidence of where the buildings were.
Speaking of parks,
But there was a spur route ran from Medway to New Carlisle. Traction line. And one time it went up and went around the block in New Carlisle. And there was a bridge over Honey Creek. And it finally became unsafe, and they would run as far as the bridge, and you walked across that on New Carlisle. And later on, the traction line stopped down where the New Carlisle Cemetery is, and had a better part of a mile to walk and get uptown.
not that far.
Well, it wasn't far from you walked the walk around, pretty close. And then part of it was just going uptown, and pretty close.
Well, we had Ken up there in New Carlisle, and that traction line ran through West Crystal Lake today,
That's
but
right.
there wasn't nothing there. You could see those swamps and those lakes
I'll tell
there.
you a little story about
And
that.
then when I got up there, I was, like I say, I was about knee-high to a duck, and I had to walk that bridge, and I've been mountain climbing, and I've been a lot of places, but there was nothing ever as high as that trestle that I had to walk across when I was a little kid, I'll tell you that.
Crystal Lake in my day was a swimming hole for all the boys that worked in the harvest field, and it was just a religious thing that you did. After working the harvest field all day, you went to Crystal Lake to take a bath. And lots of times you forgot to take a towel or a cake of soap. But there was a nice sandy marl in the bottom of that lake that made a good scarring compound. When you were swimming there in the daytime, the borderman on the traction line would always give a signal, because in them days, who knew what a bathing suit was? And he would blow the whistle, and you'd have to duck under when the traction line went by. Now that was prior to 1925. In 1925, they started developing the lake, and then it all changed. But in my earlier day, I swam there many and many a time.
So those lakes are natural?
Oh, yes, sir.
They're natural, yeah.
There's four of them. They're natural. They're from the volcano.
And you got a lot in Crystal Lake, didn't you, by subscribing to the Dayton paper? You get a free building lot.
Yeah.
20 by 100.
$67.50 is what the lot sold for when the lake was developed. It took two lots to build much of a house. $67.50.
Silver.
No, that's up New Carlisle.
But did you ever, in Medway, when y'all were kids coming up, was it a big deal to go to Springfield, or did you even worry about, did you go to Dayton?
Well, it was fairly well divided. Probably more people come to Springfield. Of course, they came to pay their taxes, and a lot of the farmers out there attended market here in town at the market house, and that kind of brought people. I would say it was 60-40, maybe 60% this way, 40% to Dayton. And it cost you a little more to go to Dayton, but of course, Osborne and Old Osborne and Fairfield was on the same route, the traction line. but I think most traffic comes this way.
But what about New Carlisle?
New Carlisle was, like I said, at the end of the traction line, and it was a place for people to go on Sundays. And they did a lot of excursion on this thing. They go to the end of the line and ride the whole thing for, I don't know how much, a quarter maybe. But that was also connected with railway transportation, and they had a circle that would take you in, go up through New Carlisle, and over Covington area, and eventually end up in Indianapolis, and come back down south route down and come up to, I don't know whether it reached Cincinnati or not, but it did go down through Dayton and come up around Springfield. That was an excursion route that people would commonly ride on weekends.
Pardon me, then the days of Chautauqua and Billy Sunday, that was a big draw.
Yes, that was in Smith's farm, and since then, the Smiths gave that to the city as a park. But it was always famous for the Chautauqua headquarters that was there in the summertime.
Would Billy Sunday come there?
Yes,
Oh,
he
yeah.
came.
Yeah, that's great.
What year was that?
Yeah, he
What
came
year
right from
was that?
Well, that's back in
Oh, in the
1980s,
20s, early 20s.
90s.
Right on the corner, there's an old big old wooden building over there.
He was out of Winona Lake, Indiana.
Yes.
That's where Billy Sunday came from.
This has nothing to do with Billy Sunday, but it just reminded me of John Dillinger lived in Springfield for 3 years and then went and robbed the bank of New Carlisle. Anybody?
He lived here?
Yeah.
I never
No, I
knew he
don't
lived
think he
here.
lived here.
I don't know if he
He
lived here.
robbed the bank that morning in New Carlisle, but I never knew he
At
lived
the
here.
time he robbed the bank, he did rent a room.
That's what I
Oh,
thought.
did he? Here in Springfield?
Yes, the day that, or maybe a day before when he was
Oh,
caged.
so it was only just a day.
What happened to,
He didn't.
The main story on that is that Springfield was a gang headquarters for them out of Detroit and Chicago. It was a sub-headquarters. And where Governor's Manor sits, was the Governor Bushnell's son built that fancy home there, so, and it was converted into apartments. And it was a well-known fact that the only time those people ever left was after dark and got back before dawn, you know. And it turned out later on that one time when the FBI began to pushing all these guys like Pretty Boy Floyd and Dillinger and some more of them, and the heat got on one day, 2 or 3 of those apartments cleaned out one night, were never.
Well, we had a great shootout at Crystal Lake.
Well, yeah, but this had nothing to do with that.
And the,
Yeah.
Well,
were you there?
I was in
what was this?
37.
God, I was in Donaldsonville, standing there watching you guys run down the road then. Huh? That was the Dillinger brothers.
No.
The father.
Dingledine.
Yeah, they lived on Western Avenue, right there at the rear.
That's right. Dingledines, the father and the son, and some Chicago gangsters.
A man named Cornetti and a man
That's right.
named Chapman.
That's right.
Right.
And we lost 2 police officers.
You did, and a deputy sheriff.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
And
at
then
the time, pardon me, at the time John Dillinger robbed the New Carlisle bank, I was in New Carlisle, and I followed out. He took a path east out of New Carlisle, and he had bags full of roofing nails with large heads, and he just threw them all over the road, and I got them in my tire, and I picked up some. He'd drove over 34th floor, and nobody ever caught him. He ran away. But that's the way he left town, and nobody caught him.
Tell us about this shootout.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to hear about the shootout.
Oh,
Well, that was
37.
37. It was the bank robbery, wasn't it?
No, Poor Bob's Cafe.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Down the wedge.
Down the west end. Yeah, that's right.
Wedge there at the railroad in the
Oh,
west end.
it was a great. They had a great gun battle down at Crystal
Well,
Lake.
that's kind of a story in itself. Harry Dingledine was a native of Springfield, and he was a glorified, honorable bootlegger during the Prohibition. I will say that with respect to him. And I ran a garage at Midway, and I took care of his car. He always drove Ford. And when his car wouldn't do 90
High-speed
miles an
Ferrari.
hour, he said, "Bob, why? Fix it." Well, he peddled whiskey around to all the farmers, a lot of Germany. He went up to Minster, Ohio, and got the whiskey. It was good whiskey. And I remember one time the heat was on pretty bad, and he tried to pull a diversion. It was in the wintertime, it was cold, and he had an old what they called a washbowl sedan, the Model T with the door in the middle. And the thing, the gas line froze up, and I went out and towed him in and got him out of trouble. But then when Prohibition was over, his little kingdom fell apart. And he teamed up with two gangsters out of Chicago and his son, and they had a cottage at Crystal Lake, and they resorted to robbing hardware stores, grocery stores, and in fact he robbed me. I had a contract with the Goodrich Tire and Rubber Company, and I got about, on Monday it was, I got in about 350 new tires, and Harry come in on Wednesday night. He broke in the back door and come in and stole them. And I always blamed him. He was a very smooth-tongued man, and he blamed it on to a man that was working for him, and I said no. But the day in question, when they robbed Poor Bob's Cafe at that time, I had to go to the post office in Medway to get the mail. And my uncle, who was about 75 years old, was with me. I just came out of the post office when the deputy sheriff and the police cars went west on Main Street in Medway. And previous to that, I'd talked to Eddie Furry, and he felt sure that Harry was the guy. And I said, oh, I bet they're going to go raid Dingledine, let's follow. So I did, and I got right in the gun battle. And it was pretty hot. And Eddie Furry was killed, Randolph was killed, Donley had a finger shot off. And Frank Hare, who at that time was well in his 70s, he at one time was truant officer when I went to school. And Frank took a station outside the cottage near a little chicken house. And when the shooting was over inside the cottage, Cornetti came out, and he had had one leg in a cast. He'd been wounded in a robbery down around Ireton. And he was the meanest looking guy you ever saw. He had red hair, freckle face, rode a motorcycle program. He'd been in my shop, and he was tough looking. And he ran out, and he took a shot at Frank, and Frank always wore a vest like this and never had a button. And one of the bullets went right through the vest. And I can see as well if it was Frank dropped and shot him in the head. And he winged the young Dingledine, and I had their escape blocked. And my car and my uncle was old, and I thought, boy, it's a good place to get shot. Well, we got out of the way. They escaped. And Chapman ran out in the brush and gave up. And I always thought that man shouldn't have been there. He seemed like a pretty decent sort of fellow. I hadn't seen these boys. They came to my shop. And then I spent 22 days in the courthouse helping send them to electric chair.
And I think that a lot of the reporters in those days wanted to go see that electrocution.
Well, here's a story that
And when they put Harry in the chair,
a few years before, a year or so before that, Harry Dingledine visited the state penitentiary, and just for the fun of it, he said, I want to sit in the electric chair.
is that right? Is that right?
That's right.
Yes,
And the second time, he didn't get out by himself. Another strange coincidence. For some unknown reason, when the funeral procession, he's buried at Nuclear. And for some crazy reason, I fell in behind that funeral procession, and they was taking Harry Dingledine and burying him in Nuclear. So I followed him a long way.
We sure did.
I can tell you nothing about Harry Dingledine and these T-model Fords. He had a load of whiskey, and local constabulary didn't bother him too much generally. But they had orders to get him, but the liquor squad had a big Buick. Well, they took off up Western Avenue, and Harry come out with these loaded booze out behind his house there on Western Avenue, and they took out after him, and he turned it on and went up in the racetrack. And they're going around that racetrack up there. Harry had a fairground? Yeah, the old fairground.
Old fairground. West Street.
Yeah. They're going around there, you know, look like Indianapolis from what I heard. And old Harry knew that old fairground racetrack like he knew his backyard, see? Well, he got around there to a certain place, and there was two posts close together, them big heavy posts, you know, and they had a rail fence around there with that big heavy post. He put that T-model through there, and when the boys went to put the Buick through behind him, it wouldn't go. And his load of booze is long gone.
He was clever. He was very clever.
Speaking, since we're on the subject of things that are not so cheerful, does anybody remember the race riots and this being the center of KKK activities?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
Can anybody talk about that?
I remember the KKK parades. I don't know where they formed. They always went down West Main Street to Western Avenue and up to High and back that way. And the only thing I remember about any race riots was that we did have one sometime when I was small. I don't know, must have been right after World War I, somewhere around in there, and they had machine gun emplacement, sandbag, National Guard being called out. And my mother had to go downtown for some reason, and like all kids, I wanted to stop and look at this machine gun in this sandbag emplacement there at Main and Limestone Street on the southeast corner.
Was that the time they hung the black man in town?
I don't remember. All I know is that I asked Mom about it later, and she said it had
Burning of the levees?
They had no, the levees was burned.
Got that
before
from, hung him at High and Limestone.
And anyhow, I was probably 3 or 4
Old Mitchell.
years old, and she drugged me down to where we caught the streetcar and threw me in that streetcar, and I got a real lecture. It was slowing down the process of getting home.
Now, I remember at that time there were a lot of black people walking, leaving Springfield, going west. And I've seen some of them, but nothing wrong with just a pair of socks on their feet. They were leaving town.
I saw pictures, it's just been since Mrs. Carter died. Mrs. Carter's husband was down at the jail,
Oh, yeah.
and she just passed away here this last fall, about a year ago. And when they cleaned out her house, they found a whole stack of big pictures on these race riots. And my daughter brought them out to the house. And they've got pictures down on Columbia Street, East Columbia, down in there. And you can see a lot of where the buildings were burned and everything. But they've got a bundle of pictures, which I suggested they bring over here. I don't know whether they'll make it or not.
Oh, that sounds like something.
What they called the levee was where the Big Four Railroad Yards was, and down up in there when they burned that out. But I'm pretty sure that
Speaking
was.
about the Big Four, Howdy could probably remember this. What was the most significant, or some of the most significant train arrivals, the people who came in on these trains?
Well, it would all be,
Big Four stations.
from the time I could ever remember, the railroad was the center. I mean, you know, the Big Four station downtown. And trains coming and going, 16, 20 trains a day, Railroad Express, ticket office, those rounded seats you'd have to sit on in the front. You go to Cincinnati or go to Columbus or Cleveland, New York, Buffalo, you know. You got those conductors, they're all old Shanty Irish guys, you know, with their hats on, you know, tickets and all that kind of business, you know. And the railroad was even politically. I think that Norm Pearson pointed up in this last election, they bypassed our town. They forgot Springfield in this election. And I can remember Eisenhower, I can remember Nixon. I chased Nixon down back R&M one day. He and Mrs. Nixon came out on the platform and posed for pictures. And you had Kennedy at Wittenberg, and you had Goldwater. You had Eisenhower with 40,000 people at Limestone and Washington Street. All Big Four railroad stations, all politically, you know, off the tailgate of the railroad train. And then it just all just vanished, you know, like a lot of things. Time takes its toll.
On board, get aboard, get aboard. Can't get aboard, get a rail.
That's right, that's right. And so the Springfield, one of the greatest occasions was they'd call you up and say, hey, old Charlie's had 65 years being an engineer on the Big Four, and he's coming in the station tonight for his last run. And you can't believe the celebration. You know, the gold watch. Old Charlie probably half tanked with this, you know, pull that train in there and stop, you know, to give him the gold watch and the family there, the old cigars and all that. It was a very classic thing because we had a roundhouse.
That's right. Yeah, you got a big roundhouse.
Hey, you know, and Springfield was really a great railroad center.
the Ohio State Limited was always a hot shot train that came through.
Oh, sure. But you know, you go back and
you got just to see it.
oh yeah, and the military speaking, the people that departed here to go into service. You know, World War I, World War II, World War the Korean, and you know, they all left the old Pensy station. Used to be able to go down here and get on the Pensy Railroad and go into Chicago overnight. You know, 8-hour run.
Well, I remember when my oldest brother left from the station to go to World War I, and I was 3 years old, but I can still remember because my mother was crying so bad, see. And he was in his uniform leaning out the window, you know, and talking to her. And I remember that just like I remember walking in the door here tonight, you know. And that's World War I. That's World War I. That was the center of everything down there.
Now the railroad was part of our real community. Of course, Bell Fountain was a big rail center. That was the biggest center of the area. But we still had a lot of transit railroads through this town.
New Carlisle was on that same railroad or branch, Big Fork, and when I came here in this area and in this furnace business, we had all of our furnaces from New York State come in on the railroad, and I didn't know any motor truck routes that ever made any deliveries there. It was all railroad.
Through New Carlisle?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That same railroad went eventually to Indianapolis and took our route to Chicago. And I made that route in World War I, or II rather, all by myself. I went from Indianapolis to Chicago to go to the training base at Great Lakes.
Who's familiar with the TWA? Flew out of the Springfield Airport for several years. Does anybody know about that?
Well, they had that. They opened up the airport out there. Oscar Fleckner dedicated the TWA. First flight into Springfield. Joe Sterling went out to Van Dyke and he flew into Springfield, got off. It's a big deal. And they, you know, nobody got on the plane, and the pilot said they got any passengers, wasn't anybody around or anything, so that was about it. It was a very short-lived experience. If you wanted to book yourself to Acapulco, forget about it.
That's when the Grinder brothers run that thing.
No. This was after the Grinders.
This is a new airport.
Yeah. The Grinders had the old airport out there.
Well, yeah.
Eddie and Carl. Yeah.
That's where the fairground is now.
Right.
When did that interurban stop going up to Urbana, and how extensive was that? How far did
The
that
Interurban Company was very successful financially.
Did that go far?
And I think
They had a bad
ceased-
wreck between here and Urbana, that's what bankrupted.
Did it?
Yeah.
That was a head-on collision of two cars.
Right.
Bodies, oh, that was terrible. I've seen photos of that wreck.
I don't know how many was killed.
They did it right around the turn up there on North 68.
Yeah.
Head-on. Yeah. Oh, it's
Just
terrible.
beyond Windy Hill.
The Interurban, I think, phased out about
The death knell
1947
for the-
as a company. You know, they had the Interurban in their last phase hauled Collier's magazines.
They had a lot of freight business,
Yeah.
lots of freight.
Oh yeah, one time that was a very successful enterprise. Yeah, they made a lot of money. Yeah.
When I first ran a garage in Medway, you could call in an order to Dayton in a half an hour, so they'd deliver something right there.
Really?
So,
Oh, that's great.
Hey Bob, earlier you said that interurban, you referred to it as slowest on the circuit. Well, I understood.
that was a DS&U, that was the first name of the traction line when it first started, DS&U, Dayton, Springfield, and Urbana.
Well, I understood the thing went 80 mile an hour.
It did.
Well, later
Well,
was
they
dead.
did, in 1928, they got some new cars, and they were fast.
They were real
Light and
fast.
fast, they were 80 miles. I'm talking about 1893 when that DS&U was.
How, was that electric cars?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
It was a trolley.
trolley.
Yeah.
Over the wires over the top, where the cars ran on tracks.
What about the transportation systems inside Springfield? Are they good or what?
Oh, yeah.
Street cars.
People didn't
I
mind
don't
walking
remember a
like
horse
you did
car in
today.
Springfield, I remember them in Dayton. And they pulled a car with a horse.
Springfield was pretty well covered with a trolley system that started off as horse-drawn, of course, and then went to electric later on. Then finally got killed off in the 30s with the buses, you know, but they had two sizes of cars. There was a larger one and a small one. The IAAF line and the West Main Street line were always small ones. But the one that run down through Snyder Park, they had bigger cars on that for the simple reason that there was more people went down there. It went down Isabel and made a circle down there by where was the boathouse and so on. It's still down there. They made a circle there, like I was talking about out in Lansdowne Park. They made a circle out there, and they didn't just reverse the car. They just had a circle there where they could swing it around.
Is it true that that one building by what we always call the duck pond that has the cupola at the top of it was a stop for that?
Yeah. That was a waiting station. The second floor was a waiting station. Down below, they kept boats. They kept boats in another building across from it. Canoes. Canoes was a big thing. You rented a canoe. Get down there, take your girl down and rent a canoe, and they rent a wind-up Victrola and bring your records and canoe up.
From that building that Floyd just spoke of, that one tree that comes out over the pond has been there for a century on time. There's one tree that elbows out and is still there because I had a gentleman give me a picture of about 80 years ago, and that tree was there. You know,
I've crawled out on that thing many times coming out of the west.
Oh, you're the guy that crossed all that.
I've been. I'm a big fat kid.
Oh, I know that.
When the Depression hit, how far east and west did the town part of Springfield go, and north and south, how far? How big was the town area of Springfield?
Our perimeter really has never expanded. If you really, geographically speaking, as far as the corporate limits, you're looking about what you see. It's amazing.
Right?
East, west, north, and south. You're talking about Home Road to Leffels Lane. You're talking about from Snyder Park. You're talking about Burnett Road. And our town, our suburban growth has been greater. But you're looking at relatively the same perimeter at what you talk about in those days of the Depression.
Are you speaking of the whole community of Springfield or just the downtown area?
The community, where you would call city.
Yeah.
Where you would call.
See, what you had to consider economically was that you had the money people were more interested in downtown Springfield than anything else.
That's right.
The Link families, the Kissel people, the Matty Burns, that was their town. That left the immigrant, the Delananos, the Capellis. They bought the nothing lands, what I want to talk about out around
Leffel Lane.
Leffel Lane, the junk nobody
Selma
wanted.
Road and
Selma Road you buy for
Selma Road.
$50 an acre, but those were the immigrant people that bought the land, of which today they have parlayed, that we all know that's been relatively very well-to-do real estate, you know, right? But Springfield-wise, we're still in our state limits.
Was there, during the Depression, was there a shanty town part of the city or kind of a real rundown part of the city as well as?
Not anymore.
Not anymore, no.
Yeah, getting into the Depression, I don't know how he remembers this, but every firehouse in Springfield before Roosevelt got elected in '32, it was a station. We had I don't know how many dairies we had in Springfield at that time, at least a half a dozen. And they put out their skim milk and it was carried to the firehouses, see? And I can remember the one down on Lowry Avenue there, it's now the Machinist Union. People would bring a jug, and the only help that the people had, there was no welfare, there was no unemployment insurance, there was no nothing. And they'd bring down a jug, usually an open mouth jug, and they'd say, how many is in your family? And they'd tell them they got so many dippers of skim milk in there, see? And then they'd hand them a package of grits. Of all the things they give damn Yankees, they give them grits. And they give them this package of grits, and the next day you're back, and I saw the line up at Lowry Avenue there, around on the Columbia Street, and clear away on up beyond Center, see? And out at old number 5 on West Main Street there, they go up towards up Dayton Avenue there and clear up to High Street. And two abreast come down through there, and that was every day. Every day.
You talk the Depression years, you gentlemen, Mr. Elshire, that went as our representative. Is that
Yeah, in a wheelchair.
the discussion came up on the floor. He went on the Roosevelt landslide that we shall pay an annual wage, and he rose to the floor and said, geez, you gotta pay them in more than once a year. That's quoted. That's right, right?
For those that don't know, he ran a filling station out of a
At the corner,
wheelchair.
that's right, at St.
Paris
Paris Pike.
and
I paid that guy more than once a year, I feel starved to death.
Does anybody remember the people that were living in the cliffs behind Masonic Home?
Yeah, that's where I learned to shoot, was down there.
What?
I used to
Cliffs?
take, yeah,
I've never heard of the cliffs.
Oh, yeah, there's big cliffs down here, there's overhangs where the Indians used to.
Buffalo Bob, aren't you?
Yeah, you're on, but where the Indians used them years ago. And then,
The caves.
well, no, they're not caves, they're rock overhangs.
The rock
Now,
overhangs,
There
yeah.
was a cave. I had 2 half-brothers and a half-sister that were some of the first children in the Masonic homes.
Really?
Yeah, right after the turn of the century. And at one time, there was a cave that ran from the rocks, what's called the North Rocks. There's cliffs on both sides of Mad River there. One's the South Rocks, and the ones that's owned by the Masonic home is the North Rocks. And this cave ran clear up underneath the Masonic home, and the Masonic home had trapdoors there, and they used that cave as a cooler, see? For
So kids down there?
no, my half brothers probably belonged in the cooler, but that's where
I never knew that.
so that's where they kept them. Well, the hobos found out. That was a hobo jungle to begin with, back along the river there, and they found it out, and they found they could get in there and they could get stuff to eat. So they went down there and they blowed the entrance to it, and I've never been able to find the entrance, but I found 2 or 3 places back there that looked like they were blown. So and then when the Depression came along, every one of these rock overhangs, like the Indians used to live in, see, people went up in the dump from the Masonic home up there, and they got, well, any kind of timber, standing timber around the river, and old boards that was thrown out and everything. And they would build a wall and rocks and all this, and build a wall and opened up these number 10 cans that the Masonic home canned all their grub in. And they'd open those up and nail them on there. And one genius, they not only that, they'd go up and help themselves to the corn, you know, that was growing and all this, that, and the other thing. And they'd thrown out an old length of fire hose, I never will forget it. And he had to walk probably a half a mile or so around to get down to where he get down over the cliffs and wherever he was getting up there. So he tied this length of fire hose around a big tree up there, and when he came home, he came down the fire hose, see, right by his house that he had built in. Yeah, that's the truth.
I never heard that
They
story.
had stone fireplaces built in there, and they cut wood down along the river, and the Masonic home didn't bother them. They weren't bothering anybody, really. They didn't mind what little bit of...
I never heard about that one.
And then across the river, there was an old guy that built a cabin over there on the south side, and there's a cave over there. I don't know whether they ever blew that one or not, but I was a pretty chunky kid, always was, and I got down in there once and thought I was never going to get out. The hole wasn't very big, and you had to get like this and slide down it to get in it, see? And you got in there, and there was a room in there, I'd say about as big as this, and 8 foot high. And then I had a heck of a time. All them skinny kids I was running around with, they didn't have no trouble. This fat boy had trouble getting back. I only made it once. See? But it's over there on the south side. But I don't remember anybody building anything over there because the overhangs weren't as great on that side as they were on the... There was a number of them, and there was 2 of them that had whole families, man, wife, and children living in the Depression.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Tell us about the gypsies that travel through this area. I understand they travel through this area pretty heavily.
Well, they came down the old National Road. I saw many of them since I lived on West Main Street. Everything came down West Main Street before they built the bypasses, and they would come through with these, most of them were horse-drawn, some of them had automobiles, but they were usually antiquated cars for the time. If we had them today, we'd have a lot of money. And their wagons were painted, and they were usually had a police escort. They wouldn't let them light. They'd usually find someplace west of Springfield was trying to think of one town out, on west of Springfield out there, about where 201, 202 goes down out in there.
Brant.
Brant.
They had
You know,
a
Brant-
summer home out in
Yeah,
there.
Brant used to let them stay out there.
Sugar Stanley.
And they didn't bother, I guess they wouldn't bother anything about Brant, but you couldn't trust them anyplace else.
If you go out here off the old Columbus Road, there's still that depression of land that was the original entranceway to Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah.
There's an old trail back there
Yeah.
that you can still see the depression of land. That was the official entranceway by wagon and everything else
Yeah.
to Springfield.
Where you come down the hill there.
Down the hill. There was a murder in Burger.
Yeah, there's a murder there.
That's right. And
Guy jumped out and
you-
yelled up the stakes.
today you can
Killed
still
him.
see that path on the side of that hill. If you go back out in the field and look at it, that was the only way to get into Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah, that was the original road.
Yeah, the original old trail. Yeah.
We've continually moved south, see.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We came through and then we moved south to what was a national road, and then we moved on over to, the reason for it, I was told, particularly going west of Springfield, was they had to get way north in order to cross the rivers. And the further south you went, the bigger and deeper the rivers was.
Okay.
And they didn't have the quality of bridges to get over. They didn't want to spend the money for the bridges.
That's okay.
That's
Yeah,
what
okay.
the deal was, see.
Yeah.
So they kept running them north. Now we keep going south because money don't mean anything as far as bridges are concerned today. Yeah.
About what year was it that the 4-lane national road opened up as opposed to the old Columbus Road, I guess, the one farther north?
4-lane?
And, yeah, you know, the one we know is a national
east.
road. And then what year did the interstate open up going to Columbus?
Well, the 4-lane national road was preceded, of course, by the 2-lane national road. The 2-lane national road came into Springfield in 1834. The national road started up in Cumberland, Maryland, and it was surveyed to Vandalia, Illinois, which was the capital of Illinois at that time. And the story of the national road is most interesting, particularly because I was born on it, so to speak, in Springfield. And you get into this thing, and the southern senators and southern House members fought the national road tooth and nail. They didn't want to put money in it. They said, well, I had the Ohio River to the south, Lake Erie to the north, and they had all the tributaries, and they had all the transportation they needed. But the War of 1812 had come along, and they found out they had to build roads. They had to build a road from Urbana up to the falls of the Miami of the Lakes, which we call the Maumee River today. They had to cut a road. It took them 26 days to haul 26 days to cut a road up there. You got 6 miles a day from Urbana. There was nothing north of Urbana in 1812. So the national road came in here, and about that time, the Southerners got control of Congress again. And they said, we're not going to put any more money in the national road because here it is, you're out to the Indian reservations, which we were in 1834. They were right up here in northern Ohio. The Indian agent was at Pickwood. And they said if the states want it, they have to match money from here to Vandalia. Well, it had already been surveyed. The federal government paid for the survey. And so it stopped approximately where either just east of the two rivers or just about the same. The records I can find on it says 5 miles west of the center of Springfield, and I've never measured off what 5 miles is. So either they quit just this side of the rivers in order to save where those two old wooden bridges were.
Would there be any identity to the Madonna statue when Harry Truman came for that dedication or not?
What do you mean identity?
Well, you remember when
Yeah, I remember that.
you say 5 miles from
She was
downtown
on the south side
Springfield?
of the road and farther west originally.
But 5 miles west of the center of Springfield is what I've read. That's all I know after.
Okay.
But I've always been confused. Why was there an old Columbus Road and the National Road?
Because the National Road wasn't there. The old Columbus Road was there before the National Road
Oh,
was
so
built.
you're talking about it was stagecoach. It was.
Yeah, it was a
wagons.
stagecoach road. Yeah, and you can get on that thing and you can keep going and you can follow that sucker halfway to Columbus.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
I've done it
Oh, yeah.
just for fun. I've done it.
Yeah.
You can follow that thing halfway to Columbus, and there's parts of it I know that I don't know where they go, but I made it way on over there, Lake Choctaw, over in that one, see? You can follow it clear on over into there. But that was the original way to Columbus.
I think it became 4-lane about 1950.
Around 60, yeah.
50 or 60?
I thought it was the 60s.
Well,
I'd say it was part of the Eisenhower system.
As far as west of town, it's 2 lanes up until 1915. I have pictures.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it was,
Being a single.
it never got to be 4-lane until in the 50s sometime. It was after World War II when it got to be 4-lane.
And it was mud and gravel. It was.
And when did I-70 open up?
Not too long ago, about 20 years, I guess.
About 20 years ago.
About 20 years ago, I-70.
Yeah, that's right.
What about the big fire?
Pardon?
What about the big fire?
Which one?
The one that burned the, I don't know what building it was, but, a
Black
big
Doctor's shop?
Eastworks.
Eastworks,
yeah.
Massachusetts County, Brain Lumber Company, Clark County Lumber Company. We had a lot of big fires.
I think this is the, was that a,
Well, the East Street Works was our biggest.
Yeah, that was.
That's
is that
before my
United
time.
Case or was that?
And at one time, the East Street Works next to Krupp was the largest
That's right.
The world.
industrial plant in
Largest
the world.
manufacturer under one roof in the
Which
world.
out there is cornered east in Canton Street and goes back, clear back through Bomag today.
Yeah.
Was the largest under roof plant next to the Krupp Works. And then, of course, it was all a big fire, you know. But we've had some monumental fires in this town, you know.
Yeah.
Parker Sweeper Company and Brain Lumber and gosh, we've had a lot of
Clark
classes.
County Lumber,
King
Mass
Buildings
Foods,
downtown.
Mass Foods and Company.
Yeah. They've done a good job burning the old town down.
Yeah.
What about vaudeville? I've always heard there was good vaudeville in Springfield.
Supertown. Hey, you got Gus Sun Times. Right around the corner, right up here at the corner, is the Gus Sun home. Where the
That's
sorority house is.
where the sorority is.
And I had the privilege, I used to date the daughter, the granddaughter, and I would sit there in that living room, and there was a beautiful portrait of Bob Hope. And he said to Gus Glock, who was Gus' son, Gus Glock was his original name, who made me what I am, if I am, Bob Hope. And I mean, he was an early vaudeville. Gus Sun Times, never paid anybody a nickel to work, but they all worked for him, you know what I mean? And so really, vaudeville was...
Was there 4 or 3 or, I've heard there were 4 vaudeville houses or 2.
Fairbanks Theater is what I remember. I don't know anybody else who
Band box.
The band box. That was burlesque. I see where you hung out. I know. That's where you went wrong in high school. You know. But I remember Mother.
You turned into the Ohio Theater.
I saw Sally Rand and her fans. I see her mother. Will Rogers came to Springfield. Yeah, Springfield was very big. And then the
Main
Regent
circuit.
Theater.
It was on the main circuit pretty much.
Get back.
Red Turban.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Get back to Bob Hope and the bandbox. Now, the bandbox was down on the northwest corner of Center and Main.
Center Main.
And they always had a 6-girl chorus and a couple of
You dirty.
comedies. I told you I wasn't going to tell you every place I've been.
I know these pictures.
Old Bob Hope was down there, and he's playing them 3 a day, see? And he wore a pork pie hat, and he always had it turned up like that with that ski nose. And he was telling him half smutty jokes they wasn't allowed to tell smutty ones, but boy, we thought that was great. He's running
Early
across,
vaudeville was pretty strong in Springfield.
and he'd run across that stage and come sliding out, you know, and then he'd crack a couple with a straight man, you know, and all that stuff. And so one guy later on, when we grew up and Hope got to be real popular, one of the guys I ran around with, he said, hey, he said, you know, we used to go down and see him down the bandbox. And I said, you're crazy, you know. And he said, don't you remember that guy with all that hat turned up and all this? And I said, yeah. Well, he said, that's Bob Hope. I said, you're crazy. Well, what he played with, the outfit he played with was called Whiz Bang Review. Marshall Walker's Whiz Bang Review. And old Marshall Walker was played a hayseed, bib overall, straw hat, red neckerchief, or red handkerchief, and always had a straw in his mouth. And he was strictly from Cornville, you know, and Hope and him used to get into it. And Marshall Walker died, see? And it come out in the paper, your paper, about Bob Hope was there at his funeral, you know, went to his funeral, because there's where he got his start with Gus Son and Marshall Walker, Whiz Bang Review, and how he played in Springfield. And of course that cost me an extra beer because the guy see that I told you so.
That's great, yeah. It was a great vaudeville town. Yeah.
In terms of,
You remember little Charlie Vince used to preach down there on the corner of Mark. Remember him?
I don't.
Right, that gentleman lived right next to him.
Charlie Vint? No.
Hey, he'd jump on somebody's automobile hood, thump the Bible all that Saturday afternoon, people come from Mark or whatever. Didn't make no difference whose car it was.
Really?
He'd jump up there and tell you all about it.
Well, that's one that got by me there, really.
He
I
was
remember.
a reformed drunk himself, you know.
Now, you know, Billy Sonny was great for that. He was a great evangelist and
Break up the
play that
flag.
trombone and jump all over the chair and break them up in
Break
Memorial
them.
Hall and
Break
everything else. You know, our Memorial Hall, even though they are trying some restorationals, was a great center of activity. It goes back to his center time where a lot of famous people did come through with the Memorial Hall, you
did
know.
anybody see anything really spectacular there that you remember?
John Philip Sousa's band, I went to that.
Well,
He come out there and he looked more like Herman the German. He had all them medals hanging all over him. You know?
Really?
Oh yeah, he had that coat on, man. I don't know how he stood up straight. He stood up like this with all his medals. Yeah, I remember. I was just a kid then. Admiral Byrd came there and made a talk. And
I think one of the most memorable was Senator Taft endorsed President Eisenhower. Made that endorsement for the Memorial Hall. And they had an extreme difficult problem to beam that out across the United States on television, but the fellow by the name of Vic Bushong at WIZE at that time engineered the feat to put the boom up on the top of the Kroll building, and it was quite a memorable occasion, you know what I mean? Yeah, well, yeah, it really was.
Well, and Vice President Curtis was here in 1930 representing the United States government at the Sesquicentennial. Yeah, the half Indian that Vice President.
Really?
Yeah, he was under Hoover, and I think it was Hoover or Coolidge. He's Coolidge's Vice President. Yeah, he was one of the few Native American Indians that's ever got that high in government, and he was here. They built a big platform out in front of Memorial Hall, and we had the Sesquicentennial of the Battle of Pickwood, see, in 1930, in October, and
We really were a vibrant community. You know that, weren't we? Huh?
Yeah.
When you rehash a little bit, we didn't do too bad. I don't think we're doing all that jazzy today. I think we did pretty well in those days.
Did they have boxing and ball?
Huh?
They had boxing and ball.
Oh, good wrestling. Hey, Davey Moore, world champion.
Do you remember
Billy Weeks was
Walter
champion of
Gasaway?
Canada.
Walter Gasaway, Jocko.
Yeah, Jocko. Yeah, oh, Jocko down. Yeah, I know Jocko. You know, Davey Moore started out fighting the Gold Glove down to Memorial. Every Monday night was great wrestling in Memorial Hall. I mean, God,
the Eagles, the old Eagles.
Nature Boy and
the Eagles used to have boxing every Friday night or Saturday night or something up there in their hall, the old Eagles Hall.
Yeah.
Davey Moore died in the ring, didn't he?
He was killed in Los Angeles, California in a fight with a Mexican fighter in the bout. Davey died, yeah. But Davey was our world champion. Yeah. Was a great little boy.
Well, every named black band played at Memorial Hall eventually.
Yeah, I sat, no whites allowed on the main floor. I sat in the balcony, Sear Cab Calloway.
The Strivers would sponsor.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen Cab Calloway and Count Basie and everything.
Up on June Street.
And the white people had to go in the balcony and the black people dance on the floor. Huh?
Do
You
you
think about that?
How
Huh?
do you remember when the International Harvester had the minstrel shows?
Henry Holshoe.
Henry
Yeah,
Holshoe
was the
did
MC.
And he always did the sailor
Well, he
thing,
was
did
great.
all three parts.
Super guy.
Yeah.
Huh? Oh yeah, that was
He wound up in the German prison camp,
Yeah.
like to set them German guards
That's
nuts.
right, drove
you know.
crazy. That's what, yeah.
Yeah.
What was it like when Kroll Collier closed?
Very devastating. You got 3,600 people out of work. Hey, you get out and that's it. You know, you hear today they lock the door, they lock the door. And it just was blank down Main Street, High Street, Fire over McKeon's, my father's business, everybody just went zilch.
Just about this time of year, too.
3,600 people, you know, you got women that spend their life as circulation people. You got magazine stuffers, you got pressmen, you got rotogravure people, and I mean, it just wiped out the whole thing.
And nobody got any retirement.
A funny thing happened, Bill. I came to Springfield just a couple of years perhaps before they closed.
Oh, that's right, Doc, yeah.
And boy, I get hit with two things. First day I come into Springfield, here's another ophthalmologist setting up practice. And then the next thing, after you just barely got started, Kroll closes, and I thought, oh boy, that's really it. It wasn't for me, because what happened was all these people had insurance, and they wanted to cash in the insurance, and most of my practice, a lot of it is elective surgery. And so all at once, I'm inundated with all of this surgical practice. And I really feel it.
That's great. Yeah, it was really great.
Could we,
We burned books. Rather tragically, the scene from the Nazi era of time when Hitler burned books, we burned books in our dump.
That's right.
Educational books. See, Kroll Collier was a great publisher of educational books. And so they had millions of volumes they took out to the dump and set fire.
That's right.
And I still have
As a protest to the place.
not as a protest, nothing else to do with them. But it's unbelievable in our educational systems that we have to burn children's books. And it was just a stack larger than this building of burned books.
And they
I have
tore
a
the
volume at
backs
home.
off.
Pardon?
They tore the back piece
That's right,
off.
Max. They tore the back
I
off.
got some of
They
them.
they tore one page off so the book was validated.
Yeah.
But you know, it was rather a comparatively tragic thing that our children, in lack of education, we have to burn books in this country.
Howdy. Dr. Kinnison recently said in 1954 when Kroll's went out, that was the beginning of the end of the Industrial Revolution in Springfield.
Could very well be here.
Right.
I go along with that.
Yeah, our industrial revolution has declined. It's tragic, but it really has. Maybe we see a new threshold one of these days. We, from the era of time, we knew of Springfield Machine Tool, Thompson Grinder, Oliver Plow, Kroll Colliers, many small machine shop and everything. Yeah,
There used to be enough foundries, and they talk
Oh,
about
high
smog.
steel foundry.
They talk about smog in San Francisco.
We built the finest
I
machine
used
in
to
the
hang out
world.
down in Jeffersonville on the weekends, and Monday morning you'd come in over the hill out there where the grinders lived, you know, on East High Street, and he was looking right across a layer of smoke, you know. And of course, we didn't think anything of it. He thought, gee, people are working. You know.
James Leffel Company, great turbines, pattern makers, and foundry men, and guys that just, you know, prided in their trade. You know, I mean, you know, guys make patterns out of wood. It was just a great trade, you know, but it just all vanished in the woodwork.
Mr. Butt, you've already mentioned you were in the service. You went off to Chicago to join the service. Were you in the military service during World War II? There.
Yes, I served 2 years in service, prisoner of war in Germany.
I had the opportunity once to hear you tell the story about being shot down over an island.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Can you tell us that story?
I don't drag that too much because I think a lot of people. Yeah, I was shot down off the coast of Holland in World War II. I was on the 16th Base with the 8th Air Force, and I had the misfortune and bailed out of the airplane first, another guy after me, and then 8 men perished in this flight. But I was saved by a Dutch fisherman, and I lived way out in the North Sea. This is a small remote island off the coast of Holland. And I had the distinct pleasure 3 years ago to be invited back as their guest and meet this man that helped save my life. You know that, and I don't want to drag it out because words.
What plane were you flying?
B-17s.
I've many an engine for.
Really? I hold
Many a one.
2 distinguished medals, and it's hard to believe that I have a beautiful medal from the Dutch government, and I was given a peace medal by the Russian government. I say that if there's an animosity against the Russian people, but at that time we were their allies. And so 3 years ago they gave me a beautiful medal on this island hollow because they co-battled the same battle that I fought on this island to liberate this island from the German soldiers on this island. So it was really it was quite an occasion, you know, to go back there. It really was.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break for some refreshments and come back in here for another half an hour, 45 minutes, and give them a chance.
Wow.
You should go first.
My wife was like me. She was born and raised in Springfield. Well, believe it or not, I met her in Jeffersonville. And that's a weird story too. It's a depression story. She's a little younger than I am. And she was in school with the daughter of this family, and I had been in school with the son of the family. And they fell on hard times, and the father of the family had his folks lived in Jeffersonville, Ohio. And the daughter only had a short time to complete her education in Springfield High School, so my wife, she stayed with the DeGroot family there on Euclid Avenue until she completed her education. Well, her brother had got a job and I'd gotten a job, and the first thing that any normal young man did when he got a job was buy some kind of an old car. That was an absolute necessity, you know. Like an Indian getting a horse or something. So we would spend our weekends, he and I, down at Jeffersonville, and we were into building model airplanes and shooting rifles. Boy, we had money. We could get down and buy 500 rounds of 22s for about $1.25, you know, or $1, something like that. That was one of the first things that came out of the paycheck, plus a model airplane supply. So on Friday evening, after we got off work, we would stop by Jane DeGroot's house, and who became my wife, and pick her and her girlfriend, his sister, up, and we'd take him to Jeffersonville, and he and I'd disappear, and we'd go do other things, but then that eventually changed, and so that's where I met my wife, was actually in Jeffersonville, Ohio, now in Fayette County, and that's down there at Washington Courthouse. And then after Lucille McKell graduated, why I still had to make trips out on Euclid Avenue, you know, and that finally evolved into other things. And so we courted for a couple of years, and in 1938 we got married, and the weather was just about as lousy as it was out there tonight. And we went to Richmond, took the girl that stood up with her back to Richmond, Indiana, and then came back and started living here in Springfield. And
I think you should tell them what we had for supper.
Thank you. They thought we were going to take the girl home, and yeah, you see, this is what you get into. Right out here in front of God, right out in front of God and everybody. See, no, he asked a question. So anyhow, we thought we would get over in Richmond, Indiana, and get loose, but they had a wedding supper for us, and the minister over there had the family, he'd been out hunting that day, and they had wild rabbit, which neither one of us cared for. And then, being a good pastor that he was, why, we had a rather lengthy blessing that I shall never forget, and quite a lecture on married life and so on. And we spent several more hours in Richmond than we really intended.
What did y'all do when you were courting? Where did you go? What were some of the things?
Well, I'll tell you, if I got an extra buck, see, and I always managed to get it, we'd go downtown, and the better shows were 35 cents in the evening for adults. So that was 70 cents, and then we went to the Wagon Wheel, which was a soda bar, and I should have known better, because I'd go in and I'd get a chocolate soda for a dime, big one, you know, and you could get a Sunday for a dime, so you'd blow 80, 90 cents, but I should have had somebody told me. She always had to have something better, and she always had to have a tin roof, and it cost you 2 cents more to have that spoonful of peanuts put on top. So that blew 2 cents more, see, to get that.
92 cents a whole day.
A whole evening, man, a whole evening. See, the best movies out, you know, that there was, and you always had a movie and a newsreel and a comedy that went with it. And sometimes you could go and they might have a couple acts on the stage, or this Henry Holshoe he's talking about would get out there and lay down on the stage in a good suit and get all dirty, and They had bank night where if you went there and if you, I was never lucky, I never won anything, but if you got real lucky, boy, you might win $5.
Ollie Nicholas on the organ.
Ollie Nicholas.
That's right,
on the
Ollie Nicholas on the
organ,
organ,
yeah. They had the organ. Have these sing-alongs where the ping pong ball, you know, they throw it on the screen and you'd sing and the ball went up and down so you know whether to sing high or sing low and so on some popular song, you know.
How many theaters were there in Springfield?
Well, the Regent, the State, and the Majestic, and the Eye Theater, and the Liberty, and the Hippodrome, and the Bandbox, and
Princess.
Colonial.
The Colonial.
And then out on Fair Street, there was a black theater on Fair Street, and at one time there was one on Lagunda out there at the river. There was a theater out there. I don't know what the name, you know what the name of that one was,
I
Johnny?
know that one. No, you got me there. No, not.
I never was in it. I never
No,
was in it.
no.
It was too, on top of that, it wasn't safe for a West Ender to go
That's
out there in
right.
Lagunda
That's
at
right.
that time, you know. The young one, at any rate. Those are the ones I recall.
That's all I know. That was it, yeah.
They were all owned by Checkers except for.
Checkers on the wall. Water fountains.
Hippodrome was.
Water fountains would turn loud. Well, down low, you couldn't get a drink of water for 11 months.
Checkers didn't own the Liberty. He was,
Bill
Setos owned the
I think
Liberty.
the Hippodrome was independent.
And the Setos owned the Liberty, and he raised all his popcorn out here on a farm he had.
South on Possum Road.
And you always got a good sack of popcorn in there for a nickel.
How
And,
about any of you gentlemen in terms of courtship? What are some of the things that you did? How many of you own a car when you were courting?
I owned a car, yeah.
All of you?
Had a car.
Yeah. I had a 28 Oakland with a big
50
40,
Chevrolet. Yeah.
40 spotlight, mounted with a stand on the running board with a big handle. It was kind of sporty.
I had a 29 Studebaker President with 2 fender wells, with 2 big
Spare tires, wheels.
and a trunk rack that came down on the back of the thing with a big wooden trunk on it, man.
You was on
Yeah, if I had that thing today, I'd have about 150,000.
You would have. That's right there, yeah.
How did you meet your wife?
She was a farm girl, and New Carlisle was always a farm town and a big town on Saturday night. And I met her in New Carlisle on Saturday night. Of course, she went to New Carlisle school, I went to Olive Branch, and we kind of knew one another through the school, and that's where I met her. Started dating her there.
Bud?
Well, I really did my courting different habit. In the hard times, early 30s, 31, 32, I was in the Army at Cheyenne. It was mostly because they walking through there, just bumming along the road, just having a big time seeing the world. I walked with a soldier from Fort Warren, there, which I had to go through the direction I was going. He encouraged me to come over to his hospital unit because in our walking together we conversed about where we lived before. And I knew people that he knew in southern Indiana, down around Madison, Washington. And because my father was a road builder. We were farmers until a crash. And then he found it very poor practice of farming any longer, and he used his teams to build roads, which Indiana was doing a great thing, building a lot of cement roads, and when labor was almost the cheapest thing they could
They were ahead of Ohio at that time.
Oh, well, they were, because they were building concrete rails all over the place. I felt just a little bit guilty out of high school taking a job from people who needed it because it was so easy for me to have, because my father was a foreman. And so I decided, well, I'm going to do these things I wanted to do. I could be a cowboy. I did. I was a cowboy, and I'd done a tour of carboning in Nebraska and got in this one enlistment in the Army because I could typewrite. That's all they wanted, was someone to typewrite all these records that were going to the Veterans Association and there wasn't anybody else in that whole post that would typewrite. All right, there was 2,000 guys out there, but not one of them knew how to use a typewriter. But I was just walking through, and I got drug in, and I was too young to join the Army. They sent a telegram to my dad, and he answered, which he requested. Hell yes, I don't know where it's at for 3 years. And, it ended up, I went home after a tour there, and a young lady who I had as a patient in the first place, and I never had any designs on this girl, but she just kept writing and writing, and I made a mistake once answering a letter, and she'd been begging to come out to Indiana where I lived, and I said, well, come on if you want to. And I guess she showed up. So April the 1st in 1937, I just took her down to the JP and we got married. That was a heck of a courtship, wasn't it? This lasted until World War II. I was drafted. I was caught in Crown Point, Indiana, which is a county seat, where Gary and Hammond and East Chicago were very heavily populated places. But the draft was so arranged that they had quotas. And each part of that county had to supply so many things. They milked that farmer town, which was the county seat, dry. And by the time they got to me, Class A, I had 3 children, and I was cleared. It's supposed to be a hardship case in that case. Well, anyhow, I had a job, which was in the installing equipment in factories up in even South Chicago and so forth, and helped make parts for tanks and all this war equipment. And a big badge that let me into all of it. And everybody says, hey, when you get to be Class A, forget it. We'll keep you out of there. I had a little bit of patriotism from being in the service. Of course, as my gosh, I had all this training in the medics. I wouldn't argue the point. But at any rate, I was drafted, and I never contested at all, and I'm not letting anybody else do so, but man, I got Dear John letters all the time that I was in service in the Pacific area. I did get back then, okay, no problem. A lot of experiences. We got to Japan even, and back, and on the biggest ships and all this, and then every ship they had out there, I think I was on. But at any rate, I come back, and I tried to fix things up. It didn't work out too good. I spent 10 years in Fort Wayne, and having changed my job from, which was with Union Carbide, from the area of Crown Point, which is a 4-county area. I took a 9-county area, a big, healthy thing, in Fort Wayne as the headquarters. That lasted 10 years, and I wasn't making any headway. And my wife suddenly divorced me and married my next door neighbor, who was my coon hunting buddy. So in the meantime, my brother had established himself over here in New Carlisle, and as a furnace man. And he had begged for me to come and help him. I was more mechanically inclined than he. He was a great sheet metal man. He'd build roofs and handle sheet metal greatly. But he couldn't understand this electrical part. And that I shined on. And finally, when this came to this point, she said, take the kids and go. I had three children, all in grade school at the time. And one boy, and the oldest, was in high school, did standard high school. And so I come down to New Carlisle, joined my brother, which he wanted me to do for several years, and just threw the other away and told them they could do what they wanted to. Well, that was the whole way of doing it, a funny way. But things never did matter to me too much that way. And when I got here, I and my mother lived with me for a while, more for her convenience, but it was very nice. We had a nice family relationship, and these kids finished school. They went all the way through school. And then it come to a point where, well, my mother wanted to go and visit with and stay with brothers and sisters. And here I am with a house and kids gone. They're married and gone now. And there's a family then who were nice folks. The man had died, an alcoholic, and left a family of 10. And one of the boys worked for us. And he encouraged a little bit of come over and visit and so forth. And we take the family and come over to the show in Springfield. Then about once a week. And the topic came up, says, well, why don't you and Mother just get married? I said, that'd be just fine. It'd be handy. I'd be able to take over this family and raise another family. By golly, it worked. And we got that. Of course, all these children weren't, most of them were adult and married already, but there was 4 of them still in school. We got that all done, and our courtship was nothing but just a matter of going and writing it down on the line. But it was beautiful, and it lasted until 80, and she passed away. Now I'm doing the things that we had planned to do. Just get around a little bit in retirement. But I haven't left working in the shop yet. You can see my hands. I still have on the greasy part of the sheet metal business. Okay, now that's enough of that.
Hattie's the last one. Anything
I met a very lovely Polish girl about 38 years ago in Springfield one night at a dance. Her name was Eleanor Dolores Cecilia Wojciechowski. I said, how do you pronounce that name? You know, because that name is, you know, it's Polish, and they were from Pittsburgh. And I learned it to say that it was, how is your house key? That got me along better. You know, if I went up to see your father, you know, good evening, Mr. How's your house key? And I got by pretty good. Lovely wife, and we have 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren, just super great.
When was that?
About 38 years ago. Yeah, you know. They had moved here from Pittsburgh. Her father was worked in the foundries in Pittsburgh, and the plant burned down, and they came here to work for the James Leffel Company, you know. And her father wrote back, said there is a beautiful stream flowing through this town. And my wife said they couldn't wait to see this beautiful river in Springfield. It wasn't Buck Creek. It was Mill Run out there by James Leffel. That was it.
Yeah.
I forgot to state, I passed that 50-year mark too, 55 years.
Super.
What were the reminiscence of the flood of 13?
Not me.
I wasn't around yet in 13.
Well, I can remember a bit of it. At Medway, I can remember them asking for help and sending horses to Dayton, and Jackson Line couldn't run, and the Mad River was pretty high. It was pretty well up in Medway and flooded out there. And I didn't get to Dayton, but I remember a lot of the activity that they would come out and encourage anybody that was a carpenter that could come and help build boats or send teams of horses and so forth from that area down there. And I did get down there and see the effects of it later on. But I was not very old at that time, but I can remember a bit of it.
Speaking about disasters, what about Springfield's one and only air wreck?
No, Springfield.
Springfield's.
Oh.
I was telling Floyd about this some time back. I was quite small, I don't remember. It was right sometime after World War I. And those of you who are familiar with Kroll Collier, part of it hadn't been built yet, but where their mail dock is, how do you know where the scene is? That was a small brick house that had several big pine trees in it and a bunch of lilac bushes out in front. That was what sat there. Very, very nice late 1800 brick house, you know, small dwelling, probably story and a half, I guess. So back in those days, every time an airplane went over, everybody ran out of the house to see the thing, regardless, you know, because they were still quite a novelty. And they buried some aviator over at, I don't know whether he got killed in the war and brought back or whether he just got killed or whatever, but anyhow, they were burying him over in Ferncliff, and traditionally this was a 2-seater and a biplane, and they went over I was still living there at the corner of Schaefer and Maine. We had a porch we could go out on, and we could look over, and they're flying over Ferncliff, you know, and they're dropping flowers on his grave. Well, they came down over about somewhere around Western Avenue and circled over, and they were climbing, and they got up there by where Crowell's is, and all at once this plane, I can see it yet, man, this plane goes and begins going like this, you know, spiraling down, and whammo. Well, all of Springfield that was out looking at that plane going into a tailspin took off, see, including my father dragging me up. And we wound up there, and I don't know who these men were. They were all dressed in leather, had the typical World War I leather helmets on and so on. And this plane had come down into these two big pines. And it folded. What it did, these two big pine trees saved these guys because it crumpled up these wings, you know, and they caught in the pine trees. Came down in the big lilac bushes there. One of them got, as I recall that, so I saw the guys, you know, man, this made a big impression on me, you better believe it. Here's this crumpled up airplane, two guys in leather with helmets on, goggles up here, you know, and battered up faces, no less, you know, all scratched up and all this, that, and the other thing, and if I recall, one of them got a broken arm. But who they were dropping flowers on, who they were, somebody'd have to go through the archives of the Cox newspapers to find that one. I can't even tell you what year it was, probably 1918, 1919, probably 1919. But that's the only one I recall of ever happening in Springfield, around here.
They was pretty common around Medway. I can pick you 4 or 5 places.
Oh yeah, you were too close to the field down there. Remember the old Barling bomber?
Yes, sir.
Remembrances of amusement parks in the county, circuses coming to town, and/or fairs.
Oh yeah.
Tell us about it.
I can tell you about circus.
Where the North Street comes up through, you know. When you come in North Street and it comes up onto Columbia, that was the circus grounds when I was a kid.
That's right.
They all unloaded off of the old Big Four in New York Central as you choose, and they started up about Laurie Avenue, up in that area on the siding there, and the elephants all came down Court Street, down Schaefer to Maine, then west on Main and down Western Avenue and into the circus grounds, see, and all they started unloading from there, and they unloaded the wagons along in about Light and Schaefer, Jackson, Western Avenue. That's where that siding was there, see, and they pulled in there. And man, every time a train went through, and as he said there was 16 to 20 trains a day, I was wide awake, man, you know, and run to the window to see whether it was the circus train. Well, the minute the circus train, I got dressed, and so did everybody else in the family, and we went up to watch it.
I remember when they used to load for the old fairgrounds.
Yeah, the old fairgrounds.
Go out on East Street, or out there off Pleasant Street or someplace.
Well, you know where Weldon Park is?
Yeah.
That was the circus grounds out there, too.
Oh, it was?
Yeah, a lot of the big circuses was out there, and they were out there in what we call Weldon Park today. That was the circus grounds out that way, and the West End one was there. And boy, the day that I tried to carry water for the elephants, so they gave me a wooden bucket that weighed 20 pounds, and I wasn't big enough to carry the water, so I carried a couple buckets of water, and that was my experience to carry water for the big old circus guy. Said, "Son," he said, "you ain't big enough to carry that bucket." And I was struggling with it, and he said, "Come here," and he gave me a big old Baby Ruth bar, and he said, "You go do something
Really?
else." Yeah.
It used to have carnivals come down to the old Eagle Street Ball.
Yeah.
Remember down there where the A&P supermarket used to be, down at the Water Street down in there? Get the old carnivals come in down there, and motorcycle drivers going flying around. And
There used to be carnivals at East and Kenton Street.
East and Kenton Street,
yeah.
And out at the old airport site, they set up a tent up, I think Ringling played out there at one time. Out there on
well, the big when a lot of the big ones came in, like the 101 Ranch and Ringling Brothers and their big stuff, they got in the fairground and the racetrack in there. Yeah.
They always had a parade downtown.
Oh yeah.
Boy, that was great. Just clappy and all the elephants and the clowns. And yeah, the downtown parade was super great.
Bandwagon.
Any remembrances of since we're at this time of year, the holidays, Christmas celebrations or any of that stuff in town, big community celebration?
Not much.
Not much.
You take this thing that started Christmas on the 4th of July. Nobody ever had anything in the stores as far as until after Thanksgiving. I mean, toys and things like that. Toys usually were exposed after Thanksgiving in the stores like Wren's and Home Store and some more of them. And then they faded out. You never saw any toys in those stores until next Christmas period, see. And you went in the 5 and 10, and they were the only ones that had any toys, and they had one 8-foot table normally, and it had a few cast iron toys, a few glass, things like glass pistols with candy in them, and some jacks and balls and stuff like that. And during the year, that's all you ever saw. Boy, it was a big deal to get taken in there and a nickel or a dime spent on you for something like that. But it was none of this stuff like you got
I think the most consistent big celebration Springfield does is the Memorial Day Parade.
That's right.
That thing has always been big. We pride ourselves in that. I think everybody in this whole town does, you know, if you're talking about holidays. You know.
There was never a Christmas parade, though, that was big.
Nothing big, or Thanksgiving, or Easter, no. But the Memorial Day Parade's always been.
That's right. It's always been the big parade.
Yeah, it really has been. Yeah, really
it's been consistent down through the years.
Sure has, yeah.
Because I remember when the Civil War veterans were riding in that thing. Jay Warren Kyle.
That's right, yeah.
Cap Needles.
The Cap Needles, that's right, yeah.
Some of those were in there. Cap Needles used to take me out to that cannon in front of Memorial Hall and pat that thing and say, Sonny, I remember when we took that. He said the day was awful hot, and I ain't talking about the weather either.
That's right, that's right, that's right.
Is anybody out here before, we're getting pretty close to our 2 hours, if anybody has any questions that they'd like to direct to anybody up here or any comments, go right ahead, feel free.
I've got one question. Who besides myself remembers when we used to have the sign downtown that brought the news? Anybody remember that? It used to be on the marketplace, and then it went on the M&M building, or went on the M&M, and then went to the market. I don't remember what. It was just a regular Times Square news, and you were probably gone.
Yeah, I was. I don't remember that. Yeah,
ran around, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just a regular Times Square news. I've often thought maybe I'm imagining it because I can't find anybody else that remembers it.
I've heard of that. That's right. Yeah.
I don't know
that I can't remember seeing now. No.
The other thing that I remember in terms of signs is a church out in the western end that had, what was it, Jesus Saves, Sin Kills?
Yeah.
That was a tin shop.
Still there.
Still there.
The sign's still there?
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Up on that church.
Just in the last couple of years.
Yes, the first thing you noticed when you drove into Springfield, it said Jesus Saves, Sin Kills, and there's flashbacks.
Oh, there, right?
Floyd, you just told me we were going to talk about depression, so I brought a famous depression item here. Normally it was a tumbler, and you had another, razor blades cost a lot of money. And so you didn't have television, and you only turned on the radio when you really felt you wanted it on, because that was battery operated. And you didn't want to spend the money for the battery, so you sat around and played cards or shot the bull like we're doing here tonight. And while you was doing that, you took these double-edged razor blades, and you had another glass with some water in it, and you dipped it in a little water, and you put these things in here like this, and while you're sitting there talking to everybody, you're sitting there screwing these razor blades back and forth inside of this glass, and then after a while you take it out and dip it in a little water and make sure you turned it over, see, and you put it back in there again, and this passed the time away and occupied your time, and when you got through you could shave with that blooming thing again. Yeah, because that's real smooth. And man, I think it cost a dime for about 3 or 4 razor blades in the pack, see? And you didn't have a dime to go with, so you extended the life of these things considerably. I don't know how long you could make one of them last, really, but believe me, you got a lot of mileage out of these. And the other thing I brought along tonight that we used to sit around and do, we used to get a great safety matches were a penny a package. But that was pretty expensive. We got a bigger box than this, so it was about that much longer and about that much thicker. what we always call farm matches for a nickel, see? And practically everybody had a little metal case that they carried. They'd cut them off so they'd fit down in there. And this had a spring top on them. You'll see them in the antique shows and the flea markets. They're a little flat case, and they got a striker place on them. Some of them real fancy. Some of them had celluloid pictures on them of New York and Niagara Falls. And so that's the way a guy carried matches. Now, if you was a poor boy out of the west end of Springfield, they had the old shotgun shells came in paper, so they not these plastic things that's ribbed. Well, you got plenty of 12-gauge shells, but getting a 20-gauge was the key to the whole thing, see? So you got a 20-gauge shell, and it was an empty shell, and it would just slide down inside of a 12-gauge, see? And so you could fill that up with, Zellar knows what I'm talking about over there. And he said they're shaking his head. So you put this 20 gauge, you fill it up with matches and put it in there, and that's the way you
Waterproof matchbox.
Yeah, waterproof.
Is that right?
Yeah, you had a waterproof matchbox. I don't think these plastic ones is ribbed. I think they'd leak.
No,
see?
they wouldn't work.
So then to pass the time away, what we would do, we would sit around and we'd get a piece of wood. I just brought this along. I'm not going to demonstrate because you can understand what I'm talking about. We'd sit there at the table and we'd split matches. You got 2 matches for one. If you got real careful and suppose that the grain broke off, well, you still had 1 match you started with, see? But if you got good enough, man, you can go right down through the middle of that thing, and you get the half the lighter and everything on the end, that white tip, see? And you came up with 2 matches instead of 1, see? And so that was another way to economize on money, because you couldn't trade anything for those things. You had to spend money for it, and money was something you just didn't have.
Hey, Cliff, tell us about the courthouse and Memorial Hall during the Depression. Yes, sir.
The trials down at the courthouse, I never bothered to go in there for the simple reason they had a whole bunch of old timers, and they were mostly World War I vets, and they was a lot rougher and bigger than I was. But that was a free show, and all that stonework around there, long before court went into session. Here's all these regulars down there. We had some good lawyers that could have hung up a shingle, boy, from being in there absorbing the law through free being in the courtroom. It's like night court, only slightly different. These guys are all in there, and it was a drama. The courtroom's a drama. Norm Carey back here will tell you that. And so that was a good place to go. Then down to Memorial Hall, I come out of the West End. I always had to go up past there when the weather was nice. You couldn't get a place to sit on that stone, you know, work it goes around the front there, because there was guys sitting there with checkerboards playing checkers, and another couple sitting there just whittling on a stick and talking, and a couple more. And you better not act like you wanted to sit down there, because you was in a heap of trouble. These guys had their regular seats all around. And they're there every day talking to their buddy and whittling a stick, playing checkers or chess. And that's the way it was. There's nothing else to do. And so guys accumulated down there around the Memorial Hall and down around the county building there, the courthouse. And that was a free show to go in there and watch some guy get sent to pen or something. You know, that was great stuff.
That's amazing.
Howdy, I want to ask you, no one has asked you about your high school days with Jonathan Winters. Do you have any special remembrances of any troubles you got into or anything together? Or?
No, I wasn't really. No, John and I, you know, we just had a lot of fun together, and we didn't get in any trouble. We didn't give our mothers any trouble. We sang in the choir together. Drove our mothers bananas on that deal, because the Episcopal priest sermon was usually good for about an hour and 10 minutes, and we'd just go bananas jotting out there in the choir loft, you know what I mean? And no, we didn't really, till after the war was over. At the end of the war, we were great to go to Dayton together and prowl around, you know, being 19, 20 years old. And we're on a Greyhound bus, and we're going down to Dayton. And this is always just outstanding to me for John. And we're sitting in the back seat of the Greyhound bus. So we get down about right Patterson Field. You know where you go underneath that viaduct? And John says, to me real loud. He says, "Fritz, hand me the bomb and open the window and blow the whole damn place up." Jesus, you can hear the bus driver putting on the brakes, the people all up out of their chairs, and I mean, that was just John for you. You know what I mean? He would just always come up with something like that. You know?
Was he, even when y'all were in high school and so forth, was he strange?
No, he was never strange. John was always funny. You know, that really, you know, he's had some periods in his life, maybe, et cetera, et cetera. No, he always was a comedian. Always, you know, I mean.
It's a natural comedian.
King Avenue in Columbus, he and I'd be sleeping on the floor, and Jay would be up there and poop the diapers at 2 o'clock in the morning, and John would get up and say, "Jesus, kid, I'm going to cut you off in the will." You know that? it just everything he did, he's always been funny.
When was the last time you saw him?
Huh?
When was the last time you saw him?
I haven't seen John for 2 or 3 years now. I got his book the other day, and I was very flattered with the personal inscription in the book to Howdy and Elner, who are my dear friends of many years gone by. So a guy like that, don't forget. You know what I mean? And I think he's been very successful. I think he's
he used to come out.
very talented man, and he used to do all of this. I mean, you know.
He come out of Tobe Woods as a hideout.
Oh yeah, any place. You know, he worked square dances down there in the Lower Valley Pike, and worked at radio stations, and just, you know, and always got his foot in the door, always being funny, you know, coming up with something, you know. And but I've always enjoyed the friendship with John. Yeah, very good.
Be nice to get him for a rocking chair.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Bud, do you have any real highlighted things that you can remember in your history?
Well, the biggest thing I can remember around here is the Boston Fair. And that's going to be a big subject. We're going to have to meet another night for that. I wish we'd have spent some time tonight, but I think most of you are pretty tired. There is a little thing here that might interest some of you. In getting around these old houses, we see a lot of antique things. On Ross Road, which is south of New Carlisle and over by Brant, a young fella bought a house on a farm, but he just bought the house alone. And he first got in, he said, "Oh God, you got to clean this thing up." So he starts in on the front part of the house, and he ended up taking all the interior down, plaster and all, or whatever's there. And he came up, it was a log house, and it had been covered up. Nobody didn't realize there's a log house any longer. I had done furnace work in it before and never realized it. But on this occasion, he asked me over one time, says, "Hey, I found something when I was stripping those logs, and one of them, there's a crack in the log." Well, in like houses years ago, they didn't have any place to put things, so they stuck it in the chinks, or in the chink places. And, there was a sheet of paper rolled up real tight into a little strip. He showed it to me, and I said, "Let me borrow that." So I copied it, and I got a few of these copies left, so just pass these around and just read them sometime at your leisure. If you can, pass them to somebody else to help.
Thank you.
And
Good.
I'm not going into detail about it, but these are things you find working around in basements and old houses, and horseshoes and everything else. But yeah, it dates back. It dates the cabin. It dates some of the practice. It gives you some of the folklore of how people lived in those days, and how they would give a divorce decree.
Bob, you brought your knife and you wanted to say something about your...
You want to get a little modern history.
All right, let's see. Oh, I've been wondering what's in that package.
Oh, you wonder what's in there? Well, it's something a little different. As a lot of you know, I've been a blacksmith, and known mostly for horseshoes. But I have to tell them there's other things I can do. They want to pass that around. This was one foot to start with, drag line cable. And the cable was welded into a knife blade, and the cable was fashioned into a knife. It's a very difficult job for a blacksmith. And I've challenged